New recording. So, hello people. Today, Fanny Anzai interviews. I have here Michael Cernovich. Hello, Mike. Thank you very much for coming.
How are you? It's good. I'm glad we finally got to talk.
So, I'm very excited for this conversation. For those who do not know him, Mike is author of the book Guerilla Mindset and movie producer of the Hoax. And there is a long path and controversies to talk about the movie and all the conversations around. Please tell us a little bit about those productions and all the stir culturally around those conversations.
Yeah, we did. I always wanted to do a movie, and that was good. I did a movie in 2016 that nobody's ever heard of because it wasn't done the way it was supposed to be done, but I did finish it. And I had one more in the tank. I felt like I had unresolved potential, and Hoaxed did it. So we're glad we did Hoaxed.
There is a lot of very interesting people involved into the movie. People that I look up to and that I wish one day to be talking to. I'm gonna just cite some because they are very interesting people and talk about very important issues. So Stefan Molyneux, Jordan Peterson, Alex Jones, Gavin McGuinness, Tim Pool, Lauren Southern, Cassie J, and on, and a lot of people that you have interviewed in your own podcast on YouTube. So I think from all the things I talk on my channel, mainly we would talk about me and you talk about the free speech and cancel culture because I think it's something that you have kind of experienced, uh, strongly experienced through all this path. Can you tell us a little bit how did it go?
I think I lost you for a second. You paused on me. I don't know if that was
Oh,
me
I'm
or
sorry.
you. Yeah, so just
Yeah,
repeat that question. Yeah.
yeah, uh, that you have strongly experienced what we call cancel culture, and how did that go for you? Like, how did they cancel you? How was that on the movie?
Oh, I've been canceled multiple times, at least five, I think. And how has it worked out for me? Luckily for me, I wrote a book on mindset. I'm psychologically robust and was able to ride the wave, I guess, so to speak. But I think most people would have been broken for sure. Most people, not even most, we're talking 99.999% of people who went through what I went through would have been broken easily. But I understood because of a life vision, I have purpose. I understood what was going on and why it was happening. So I was able to navigate it. And in terms of the Hoax casting, I don't know that any film will ever have a cast like that again. I know I couldn't do it again. I mean, we had Ryan Holiday, who's on the left. We had Hawk Newsome, who's Black Lives Matter, is on the left. Jordan Peterson, before he became, big time superstar or whatever. We just had a perfect. It was in a way blessed by God, where it was the perfect timing. I was the person right in the middle of all these varying networks, and I was able to make it happen. If I try to get that same cast today, not a chance. I mean, we had a better cast than No Safe Spaces, which Adam Carolla did with Dennis Prager, and they're both big names. Like no one was able to pull off something like this. And I remember telling the guys, you know, enjoy it, because we'll never be able to pull off a cast like that again.
That's true. And you think the cancel or the way that was seen as an independent movie, or more not because of being independent. The problem, I don't think, was that. I think is more the narrative, because it was like talking about narratives and propaganda. Uh, is that what made, like, for example, I wanted to point this out that I found out on Wikipedia, in between being an American commentator, social media personality, anti-feminist, MRA, political commentator. Excuse me, there is a conspiracy theorist there? Is that true?
Well, and that's what I always tell people. How long have you read my stuff? Or how much of my stuff have you read? Probably a lot, right? When have I ever talked about men's rights activism? Right? When? And that's why we talk about how narratives get created is people are trying to create a narrative. But if you read my stuff, you're like, wait a minute, men's rights activist? I don't even understand. And then they try to bring in like racial stuff. It's like, that doesn't work. And then they try to do conspiracy theorist because anything that goes against the mainstream norm, they consider, that's how they dismiss it. That term, I don't know if we mentioned that hoax or not, but we should have. That term was created by the CIA and filtered into the modern lexicon to dismiss any kind of idea that would go against the narrative. And that's what they do. And that's what we talk about, especially in my book Hoax, which didn't do nearly as well as the movie, much to my disappointment, because I thought it was better in some ways. They'll frame a narrative about you, and then they'll keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. And that's what people think you. So a lot of people are like, oh, is that Mike Cernovich, the Pizzagate guy? And I was like, I don't know how many times I have. And it doesn't hurt my feelings. It doesn't make me sad. It doesn't even outrage me that a lot of that's a lie. It's just annoying, right? It's like a tedious nag. It'd be like if everybody said, you wear that blue sweatshirt every day. And I saw that 100 times a day. I would just start to become frustrated, not because I care, not because I don't know it, but because you're being spammed with the same thing over and over again. But it does take hold in some minds of people, and you have to become comfortable with people believing things about you that are not true. And that's the story of my life.
Being attacked or accused of the straw men that the opposition makes of you. I think it is very relatable to a lot of my guests. We try to break down, as like debunk those straw men and say like we are not this, when you talk about different issues and usually controversial topics. So I think what the hoax and the entire group was talking about, and that was so sensitive for the mainstream media, was that talking about in that political scenario, that moment that was Trump, fake news, Antifa, and all these narratives. And it is something very relatable to other people that I talk to that talk about critical studies, social critical studies, infiltrating academic studies and putting this type of filter on in front of people's eyes, and then they have this expectation, to find. So if it is Mike Cernovich talking about whatever issue, if is any way related to race, oh, he's white, so he's racist. It's easy to frame and to just pick and choose in this narrative. And it's a lot of very relatable to also what is going on right now with Black Lives Matter. And and I think it's a hot topic. I have seen you very active recently these last days on Twitter. Can you talk a little bit about this, on all these riots versus protests?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, you raised a number of points. One is, and this is what I didn't want hoax to be, it becomes like a conversation amongst people who have been attacked by the media and canceled. And I think a lot of people, including some of my friends, they're really like bothered by it, rattled, I think, in a way that you have to push past, because this, and again, this goes how the media is like a mass mind control device. If 99% of people who know me personally, and they read something, it's just not true. They don't even understand the narrative. But if you read a lot of media, and that includes my contemporaries, then they think, well, most of the people think I'm bad because that's in whatever publication. But no, most people actually like me. Now, their approval of me is super high, despite the hate pieces, because they don't work as much as they used to, because there's that lack of public trust. Who it does hurt, though, is it hurts people. That's why we had Cassie J in the movie, is if you are because she was a legitimate filmmaker in terms of like, I'm legitimate, but I don't have people giving me money from Hollywood, right? Nobody in Hollywood's going to fund my project. She had that. but then she went against the narrative just a little bit. Now she's kicked out of Hollywood. That's where people get hurt. There was a guy, for example, he was a writer, a co-executive producer of a show in America, a popular show called Law and Order, about the police, and he posted a picture of himself with a gun and said, looters better stay away from my house. Nothing racial, nothing fired. Why? Because he's racist. Why is he racist? Well, if you oppose the looting, you're racist. Or if you call looting, you're racist. And that's how quick it goes, and that's how fast you're spit out of the machine. But I'm not in any machine. But if you're in some kind of machine, then you will get canceled and it'll ruin your life.
Yeah. And even further than that, now to avoid the racist narrative is also racist.
Right. Yes, the recursiveness of racism.
I have been called white supremacist and racist more than a year ago when I started my channel, because I point out one crime that happened in Brazil. I'm Brazilian, and there was a crime that happened, and the perpetrator, the victim, they were pretty much, they look like brothers, like siblings, like really close in features and color. And that was something I found out when I went to dig a little bit more after seeing people protesting, and a lot of actors and actresses and, you know, people in mainstream media advocating for like some type of Black Lives Matter. So I went to check the information, how it happened, the reports, how it happened, the death, the autopsy. And when I saw the picture of the two guys, I had to publicly speak against the racist narrative. Oh, because people were talking about the guy who killed was working in a big company and was just a security guard in a big company. They were portraying like this big company killed this poor client that had a gun, that happened to have a gun in the store. So the case was like just a bad work of a security guard. He figured out that someone had a gun, asked to give away. He didn't. They fought, and he strangled him to death. Kind of not similar because in the case of Floyd, the guy was already handcuffed, and we understand that was even worse police cop job of the cop that killed Floyd. But still, I don't see where is the evidence for the racial motivation. And when I see people saying like, oh, it's clearly racism just because the cop is white and the victim is black, I still hold myself back to like, no, I don't see that, because I did not hear him saying like, I'm going to kill him because he's black. I did not hear him saying, you know, I'm going to kill this fucking N-word, because you cannot even say. And in the case in Brazil, there was like not even the color to point out. But for me, the people that see the color point as racism, those are actually the racists that are putting the filter, that are looking, that have this expectation to find something that fits the narrative. And in Brazil, when it happened, I just point out, guys, don't look like it's color related or even racist. And then just to point out that I was like already called out as, or accused, attacked as a racist and white supremacist. And I was like, have to explain that I'm not even white. I'm clearly not white. So I don't see the point. And I follow Gavin, for example, McGinnis, and I love all his stuff, his material. And I love how people actually use, and I've seen you talking in one of your interviews with, I think, Unsafe Space, about how this other side want to call you racist, even to have a wife that is not white. It's like, oh no, that is a fetish. So right. It is yellow fever is a type of racism.
Yeah, that's why we talked to Scott Adams and Hoaxed, and why I understand, I think maybe these issues better than most, is everybody has kind of a filter of reality, right? Whether we know it or not, or whether we're conscious of it or not, we all have a filter of reality. And just like a pair of glasses. And if you put on a pair of glasses and you believe that America is inherently racist and the police are inherently racist, then you see a white police officer and a black man being held down, and you think racially motivated killing. The flip side to that is there was an Asian American by the white officer, and somehow we just filter that out of the conversation. And then, of course, the flip side too is when there's crimes committed against white people by blacks, and you say, well, that was a hate crime. They'll say, no, it wasn't a hate crime, or you have to prove it's a hate crime. You have to provide more to make your case, and many times they won't even allow you to make your case. There was, for example, a Chicago disabled white teenager was kidnapped by a number of African Americans. They were saying, you voted for Trump. They were using racially motivated language, and the media didn't cover that as a hate crime, even though the evidence was there for that being a hate crime. And that's all due to, in some cases, a filter of reality that people have and don't know. And in other cases, it is willful dishonesty, and sussing out which is always the challenge.
So a little bit more on the attacks, just to clear up the beginning, and everybody that, just like in, I think it was the same interview, the Safe Space, that there was a girl and she mentioned that she used to believe completely wrong things about you just from the narrative of the left, that she was left, and then she had this idea, this straw man of you, and then she asked you, I actually found the same way in Wikipedia that you have been characterized as an alt-right in the same idea of the involvement in politics, and but you don't describe yourself as such. So where have you changed your mind about it? Where do you fall into the political compass? Or where would you?
Yeah, there's no political compass that's accurate now in America, because I'm pro regulating big corporations. It used to be that if you're right wing, you let corporations do whatever they want to do, and then it was a left wing position to fight against monopolies. But I'm against monopolies. So is that right wing or is it left wing? Well, now the left is aligned with big corporate donors and big corporate interests, and Democrats have become a party of the rich. So I'm against that. So is that right or left? And that's why their labels are breaking down. They don't have a. This is, again, goes back to your filter that we all have, is if your filter of reality is that everything's right or left, which is the media, you have to throw me somewhere. And if you don't like me, you're going to say far right, because that's a very scary label and it makes people afraid. Although what is tending to happen is that the label no longer has a meaning, because you're like, oh, far right, Cernovich is far right. Well, I guess far right isn't really that extreme anymore. And the media, they have run out of labels to use on people because that's their own fault. It's because they have to characterize people. If you're being an honest characterization of me, Hoaxed is a movie that was 2 weeks in a row, top 10 independent best-selling film. That's, for a filmmaker, an astonishing achievement. They won't call me a filmmaker, though. They have to cast me in these ideological terms. They can't say Mike Cernovich, filmmaker and author, even though my book, Guerilla Mindset, international bestseller, sold hundreds of thousands of copies, been read all over the world. I was recognized when I was, I lived abroad in 2015, Ho Chi Minh, I lived in Vietnam. People in Vietnam would come up, oh, are you Mike Cernovich? This is before any political thing. And they knew me from my books and my other work. But if you just say Mike Cernovich, author and filmmaker, that doesn't make me look like an evil character who you should disregard. And that's why they throw that line in there. Michael Malice talks about that in his book, The New Right, is they throw that little parenthetical in there to tell the reader, don't trust whatever this person is about to say. He is a bad man. Where if they were honest, they would just say Mike Cernovich, author and filmmaker. But they won't do that. They have to apply some kind of ideological label. And because of that, their own labels' values are being twisted and devalued.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a type of censorship. It's the other way of canceling is to demonize the other side. So when you just people will not listen to them anymore. Just like they're bad. It's easy to put an adjective, a negative adjective, and that is definitely something when you see that is not a honest journalist, when there is a narrative involved, when they start using a lot of adjectives, trying to already give you some meaning or some pass some message about that person instead of just let you hear it, this person. And I usually I don't consume mainstream media. I only watch YouTube, and I try to avoid the people commentating. Every time there is something very controversial, it's like, oh, Trump said something. Okay, go to the video of Trump saying the thing instead of people saying, oh, Trump said this, because everybody is paraphrasing other people and straw manning actually the other side, men when they disagree.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And that's
sorry.
why that's why the media went from the evolution of cancel culture went from hit pieces to getting platformed, because they found out when they write hit pieces on a person, that person becomes more popular because people can look into themselves what the people believe. And then what they do now is then they go cry to social media companies, that person needs to get banned. That's the ultimate control over the narrative, is getting people that you write about banned. That way they don't have any power to write back. So let's say, for example, you see my name mentioned in an article and you're like, oh, I wonder who that is. And you Google me and you go to my Wikipedia and you're like, wow, this sounds like a, Charles Manson's son-in-law or something. This sounds like an evil person. And then you're like, well, but I'll go to his website. And you go to the website and you're like scrolling. Where's the stuff? Okay, I've read 100 tweets. I've read 1,000 tweets. I've listened to his where's his evil stuff that he's doing? And then you actually a percentage of those people become converted because you're like, well, I did my research. What I read about him was BS, but in watching his stuff, I ended up liking him. That's why they want you to not be able to respond. Then they just have complete and total control over public perception of you.
That's totally true. I have encountered a lot of people that I admire, follow, and found on that way, on like someone saying like, this is ridiculous. This is, I'm mad about this, or bragging about something. And I go check and I find the page and I was like, wow, I kind of like, I guess I'm bad like this person.
Right.
And start following. But it is the fear, and it is anti-free speech because they cannot battle ideas. Because in the idea of a free market of ideas and free speech, it would be like, let all these speeches have equal voice, and people will push upvote, and the good ideas and the bad ideas are going to be will be not popular. But instead, now it is unpopular to have different ideas. It is a little bit what I talk to a lot of people on the multiculturalism, diversity of people. And so, okay, what about the diversity of ideas? Oh, no, you're racist. It's like, wow, I thought everybody was allowed to talk. All ideas were the same value. All the voice could be, free speech is everything you can say, but not inciting violence. And the hate speech conversation, or this frame, this political frame, and to try to ban people is to try to help really censor in that way, like use politics to censor people. And I don't know, it's sad and silly that we have gone so recently through dictatorship and censorship and realize, yeah, it's bad, let's not censor people, and then comes all over back the discussion on talking about online conversation or virtual environment, and say, no, we had this conversation, it's the same way. Just let people talk. The good ideas are going to be selected. We're going to sort in between, and unhappily, they are just too afraid to talk because they don't have arguments.
Right, but just to show that the other side of the argument, there is other side to the argument. The argument is, Charlottesville, these people, somebody gets run over because they organized on social media. So Charlottesville was probably the most destructive thing that ever could have happened to First Amendment law, not the First Amendment law, but free speech as a value or a culture, because It's one thing to say, well, people believe bad ideas, and then we hash it out at the ballot box, and then we respect our elections, and then whatever happens next, we fight the other guy at the elections. But then when you have some nut job run people over, and they're all on social media, and they all organize this event on social media, then it's a problem. Now, the counter to that argument is more people have been killed in the riots, more African Americans have been killed in the riots than were killed by all police. This can be fact checked. More African Americans have died in the rioting and looting than have been killed by officers this entire year. So then the argument would be for me, hey, if we need to cancel people, then we should ban everyone who supported looting, rioting, and violence. But that doesn't happen. It's a one-way ratchet, which is why the argument that I just presented, what I call the Charlottesville argument, has intellectual heft to it if it's applied consistently. But because it's not applied consistency, we know that it's not a genuine good faith argument. Yeah. Because me,
it's a fight of powers.
Yeah, I could accept a rule that if you incite violence or advocate for violence, you should be banned from social media. I don't agree with that necessarily, but I could argue for that if it were applied equanimously. And the flip side to that is, if you hold an event and one of your guys who shows up kills someone, then your events should not be allowed on social media. That's a rule that if it were applied to everyone, I could say I see the logic in that, but it isn't applied that way. It's applied one way, and people die in these left-wing things. People die in these lootings and riots. And frankly, people die at rock concerts. This is an issue that gets lost in the shuffle, is people die in rock concerts. People die in football games, soccer matches, when they're all trying to run towards the fence. Just when you put a lot of people together for any reason, something tends to pop off. So does that mean you ban any event where there happens to be some kind of stampede of people? Nobody can talk like this. That's the problem. Nobody other than me has really thought through these issues as a lawyer, legalistically. Because as a lawyer, the legalistically means you think of a generally applicable rule, knowable in advance. There's what you learn about when you study the Constitution in law school, as I have, and written about the Constitution as I have, is the fundamental tenets of due process: clearly established rule, knowable in advance. So for example, you would say the rule is, if you hold a political event and someone gets killed, you're banned from social media. If you articulate, regardless of politics, if you articulate that rule, you know what people do? Well, I'm going to keep the peace then. Because me personally, I know that because I'm such a high target, I hold major events. The only violence happens when Antifa attacks someone else, because in my event, I have people, veterans of every kind of military operation out there, roaming around, hanging out. Anybody acts the fool at one of my events, they know that that's not going to be tolerated, because I know that I'm a target, and I know that anything bad that happens is going to reflect on me. So but even though there's not a written rule, as a lawyer, I can ascertain what the rules are unwritten. That could be a rule, and then you would have due process, and then it would apply to everyone. Oh, you had an event and somebody died, and you're Antifa. Oh, well, we're not responsible for what happens. Well, then why would people be responsible for what happened in Charlottesville, right? You have to be able to draw these distinctions, and it isn't. It's just strictly, we live in the Nietzschean will to power age, where one side wants to amass as much power as it can and crush any dissenting voices.
Yeah, it's a fight of power, and it's full of what you said, double standards, because they don't have principles. For example, what you mentioned about the riots, it is very unprincipled and very hypocritical to say that they're going to harm other innocent people or destroy other people's properties because one innocent person was murdered. And I have stood against this irrational tribalist idea, because I think when it turns to the racial issue, it segregates people, it splits society, and it causes like what do we see as what would be like a modern civil war, is what you're going
Well,
through.
well, yeah. What people in the U.S. don't really understand. Have you ever read the book The Accountant's Story by Pablo Escobar's brother, who was also his accountant?
No, I don't
Okay,
think so.
you should read it. It's one of the best books I ever read. And as I'm reading it, I took for granted. He said there, because Pablo would get blamed for violence, and he said, but Colombia had these civil wars and these violence all the time anyway. So they would, it isn't that we're excusing Pablo Escobar, which we're not. But what I was struck by when I was reading the book is how in the United States we take it for granted that it's not the Sandinistas and some engaged in some kind of guerrilla warfare against the government, and that there isn't this violent regime change, and that tens of thousands of people aren't being killed every year by opposing forces. We just take it for granted. Whereas in the case of Pablo Escobar, violence was just the norm. Political violence, in terms of assassinations of political enemies, were just the norm. And we take that for granted. And now we're heading towards that direction where it'll just be gang fights on either side. And then that will lead to totalitarianism. That will lead to fascism, because once the people fundamentally, what they want to be, especially in America, they want to be able to go to work, have a family. People in America want to work, almost for the most part. That's why people lost their minds in the lockdown. People want to be able to work. They want to be able to take care of the family. They want to have some kind of upper mobility. They want their children to be able to have a better life. And we take this for granted, by the way. In the rest of the world, you don't assume that your children will have a better life. I've lived all over the world. You don't assume when you have a child in Cambodia or Vietnam, although that's changing certainly in Vietnam, you don't just assume, oh, my kids will live a better life than me, right? In the US, that's always been the assumption. And if you have strife and unrest and political violence leading to assassinations here and there, that is gone. We'll have favelas, we'll have all of the problems that a lot of other countries have if we don't fix it now and address it now.
Yeah, I think the most important thing you brought up is the comparison of these governments, and to talk about the individual, this force, this fight of force in between what is the government and people. That for some reason in the last decades, or in the last decades of the past century, we were taught that there was a very leftist agenda in the schools that actually made people believe that is the individual versus the government, or the collective community, the people against the government, and that somehow that they are opposite, and that capitalism is something bad. So we had definitions, not the definitions did not change, but the meaning and the feelings that were input in the education were negative to the structure that we have that actually made us successful. So I think there is this kind of indoctrination, a political indoctrination, a kind of a brainwash that is very collectivist, in the same way as other things like racial groups, religious groups, all the things that make people feel empowered by the group justification, like for the greater good, they will infringe and transgress the individual rights, what is definitely not what the government is made for. I think the government is made ultimately, like, of course, for the community to look up to everybody and each individual when there is to have any problem and you need to report to someone, and not to your neighbor is necessarily is the one to have to take care. So we wanted to give this responsibility, but ultimately the responsibility was to take care of the each individual's rights. But for some reason right now we use the government as, oh, the majority can do whatever, and for the greater good we're gonna take each individual's rights away or transgress them. And I think it's an important conversation
Well,
nowadays,
okay, it is.
because
And
what you mentioned about the political compass that I thought was something we should also talk a bit more, is that it's not as people simplify as left and right, and that is the problem, because you can be left and right right and be authoritarian. And I think for people that are more centrist, as like me, and libertarians that look more for the individual rights and freedom, it's very far from what we want. It would be like those two people, those left and right authoritarians, are up there on the compass, and I would be down here, still very centered, more to the right. Like I mentioned, I do believe in individual rights and property, and but libertarian, not anarchist. So the 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 field is much more complex than what people simplify in left right.
Well, so there's a number of responses. That one is that I'm a little bit older, read a few books here and there, studied this kind of violence for a long time, and we had anarchist bombings early in America. Famous lawyer Clarence Darrow defended Sacco and Vanzetti in a pretty infamous case that you learn in American history. We had the government use its power of the majority to draft people to fight in wars they didn't want. For example, the Vietnam War. I remember I had a poignant moment when I was in Vietnam exploring the caves, and I'm walking and you just can't even fit in there. We're just, body structure just won't even fit. We're not even, the bone structure doesn't work. And I thought, imagine you're an 18-year-old high school football player. You graduate and you're just like, all right, 2 months later, you're in Vietnam holding a gun, running through these jungles for war that you don't believe in. At the time, blacks were denied civil rights, which is why Muhammad Ali would not consent to being drafted, which I thought was a just and moral position. So there's always been authoritarianism, but there's it's innate to our human DNA, authoritarianism. One of my favorite books is The Lucifer Principle by Howard Bloom, where he talks about how we can't get away from evil because evil and authoritarianism is in its own way a driving force. And here's what I mean. Steve Jobs was an authoritarian. You could not, there was a site in America called Steve Jobs is an Asshole, famous blog, because he was a fucking asshole. But that's why he accomplished what he accomplished. He just said, no, look, you're going to get in here. Here's how we're going to do it. This is the way we're going to make it happen. My way or the highway. You have to have that sort of, that Schopenhauer will to achieve, and if you don't have it, you don't have anything. So the idea, though, is if you're designing government and you accept the inherent evil nature, whether that's because we're fallen from God or whether it's because we're evolved from chimpanzees, whatever it is, we have it, then, at least from my perspective, you want to create the government that militates against human evil, and that's why you want to give the government less power than it has. And whereas, so the left is in this position where they want more power for institutions that can commit more acts of violence in an organized way than they ever could on an individual way.
Yeah, I think the problem with the left is that they don't want to. It's not that to fight against the status quo, to realize that we already grew the government too big, over the limit that we should have. There was a limit. We should have stopped the government before. And I was like, no, that is where our individual rights start when we talk about gun controls and other things and abortion. But the worst thing is because these people are actually fighting for the power to do the reparations they believe would be the thing that would be right, and not realize that, oh yeah, history, we are so sorry for what bad happened there, and we are making better naturally through history. You can see in all the sense humanity is doing better, and not necessarily because of authoritarian measures, but because the evolution of the nature of us evolving by experiencing. And we don't need to destroy history. We learn from the bad examples as well. But in the same way, we don't need to push the pendulum to the other side and try to reparate and fight the misogyny that we had in the past, and the sexism we had in the past, with a third wave feminist that will push not for equality, but more for equity, and not for the equality that we have already, but for equal results. So I think it is a deep conversation. We're probably not going to be able to go over all the topics.
Well, and that's where, if the predicament now that we're in, at least as a country, is that the people who want free speech and more freedom are right wing. But so you have to balance being.
It's just because we are righter from them, and then that is the way to. Oh, they're right, extreme right. I've heard that even in Brazil when they frame Bolsonaro as extreme right. I was like, okay, maybe he is righter than what he is as a politician because he is a president and he needs to follow the rules as being a president. But it's still like it's just because of his opinion. Then he is extreme right because of the people looking at him or on the left and in their perspective, oh, is evil right, and
Which and
you lose that nuance.
and this touches back to something we said earlier, which is that how do you call somebody who won over 50% of the vote or a high percentage of vote extreme right? If half the popular, and that's where these compasses break down, is Bolsonaro was widely popular in the country. This is not somebody who ran for office and won 1% of the vote or 3% or 20% of the vote. You can tell me what exact percentage he won, but it was quite high. So how do you call him extreme right when there has to be a polarity? And if there's a polarity by definition, right versus left, then you're saying, well, somebody who won half of the vote is an extremist. That simply doesn't make sense. And that is also, too, white Westerners and their own racism and their own colonialism thinking the idea that I could just say, oh, Bolsonaro is far right. As a white Westerner who doesn't speak Portuguese, most of these white liberals probably think they speak Spanish. They don't even know the language is Portuguese, right? They just don't know anything. Oh, I read it somewhere, he's a far right-wing lunatic. And you're like, okay, what language do they speak in Brazil? Spanish. It's like, no, they speak Portuguese, right? You don't even know that. So that is too the racism that we have in the left in America, the idea that you just know what's happening in Brazil better than the Brazilians, and that you can ascertain the political orthodoxy of their highly popular elected leader is frankly is absurd and racist.
Yeah, that's true. And I would try to cut here now because you said 45 minutes, and I really want to talk at least a little bit about.
No, we can keep going. I'm just here with my cigar, so we can keep going.
That's nice. Thank you. Because I really want to talk about the guerrilla mindset, but it is important to point out that not necessarily mainstream media, but it happened to be in United States as well in Brazil that Trump and Bolsonaro are seen as right-wing just because they are right from the mainstream media. And that is what actually projects that not project, but yeah, it projects for us what are their real opinions or their political compass. We can put them on the left because they keep calling him right and say, oh, so you don't believe those things and you want to actually push in the other side. And the worst thing, you are actually authoritarian on that side. You actually want to tell people how to do in your way and not just not do. And I think I have talked more recently a lot about politics because I tend to be more libertarian in that way, that I would just say we already gave too much government, too much power to the government, and we should retract a lot of that. Maybe that would be the solution. For example, for Brazil, that we suffer so much corruption because you have huge government with almost 30 ministries. And with like, what is the government really giving to people to have so much politicians employed and spending so much money on that?
Well, that's the issue. There's no consistent theory of government, and that that's the problem again on my side, because the left this, the left that, my side loves to complain about them, and a lot of people do, and I'm not knocking that because I certainly do my share, but I have a consistent theory of government, and it's incumbent upon people who just say, well, the left is doing this, to articulate, well, what's your theory of government? The idea that, for example, if you're going to have a government, the reason you have a government is to do things that you can't do individually or even collectively at scale. So, for example, the interstate highway system, or national defense, or pandemic response, which every government, state, local, federal failed, which shows again that we don't even have a coherent theory of government, which would be to say you can't fight a pandemic at atomized level, or even at a city level, or even maybe at a state level. Maybe it's got to be international. So why then is it, if we have a pandemic, even if some people think it was overblown, even if they thought it was overblown, the response was a joke. Oh, this is going to shut down for a couple of days. That might shut down. I don't know what, this, that, or the other thing, because nobody realizes, no, this is literally what government should do. So government should be doing much less of other things and much more of, example I use, kind of nerdy, as asteroid defense. The there's nothing you and I and all of our friends could do to stop an asteroid if it were about to hit America. We ought to have $100 billion a year department to study things like asteroids. What happens if an asteroid is about to hit? Right? We don't. It's maybe one or two guys in some lab somewhere monitoring the situation. But if you don't actually think about why government exists and why we should have government in the first place, then it wouldn't even, you would laugh. You go, asteroid, what did Cernovich is crazy. This guy's da-da-da. It's like, no, but I have an actual coherent theory on government. And because of that, I'm much more worried about pandemics. I'm much more worried about asteroids. I'm much more worried about things that you cannot do at the private level, even with Elon Musk, for example, in SpaceX. He did that with NASA. So if we need space exploration, yes, there is room for private partnerships, but that's why we have NASA, because it's just not something that Steve Jobs or someone could have accomplished, because you're not going to get money, because there's no money in that. Like, oh, we went to
I totally see that.
Mars, yeah.
I think a little bit. I'm kind of like a game nerd in that way, that like I'll have to point it out. Death Stranding from Hideo Kojima, it's like it brings a lot on that idea of what you're talking about, because like, yeah, in the private level, we know people are able to do things and get together, and nowadays with all these Kickstarters and other things, it's even easier to accomplish stuff. But there is another level of things that are so grandiose that we do need to do in the public level. And definitely it is. Just this morning, I was talking to my husband about the space station, because, and you mentioned Elon Musk and SpaceX just got to the space station. And he was actually telling me, like, did you know China was banned from the space station? And I was like, no, I don't know why. And they're like, all just curious. And I was like, oh, okay, I will search about this after. So yeah, there is this level of so much money. It's so big of a structure, and we need to involve everybody and put the government. But we need to retract the government of taking care of people's lives in the personal level. And that is what we try to retract when you talk about being more libertarians.
Right. So I believe, excuse me, the way when people ask, that's why the political compass again breaks down, is I believe that government should be doing much less than it does in terms of hyper-regulation of life, and more of what it's not doing, which is, what do we do if there's an asteroid? How do we get to Mars and beyond? How do we deal with the pandemic that's truly an international incident? They should be doing more of that. But instead what happens is that, and there's a number of things. Peter Thiel talks about this in 0 to 1, which is, and I think it's changed a little bit since the book came out because of Elon, a singular force of nature. But when you would, in, say, the 1950s, say, we're going to go to the moon, the 1960s, people were like, fuck yeah, we're going to go to the moon, right? If you say today we're going to go to Mars, what's wrong with this guy? He's fucking crazy. Electric cars is fucking stupid. Can't believe it. You're dismissed as a crank if you're like remotely visionary. And now everything is getting, it's like there's a Space Odyssey, 20,001 Space Odyssey, where in the beginning it's the chimpanzees hitting each other with sticks, right? And then you're flying to the moon. We're like doing that in reverse. Instead of flying into the moon, we're picking up sticks again and hitting each other like we're all, crazy.
Really good. Totally. Yeah, and it's true. And I think it's a lot of the conversation on political agenda, not political, but cultural transformation of political acts. In Brazil, we had this recent change. I remember when I was a kid, and I'm just 35, and I remember we were like, okay, Brazilians, when talking about going out, talking to foreigners, we were kind of like, yeah, we're third world country, kind of a little ashamed that we were like in development country, and but well, Brazilians are poor, but at least we are hard workers. We're proud of something. We had some identity, some national identity. With the policy, with the populism that the Labour Party brought, and gave money to people and help people, and like very authoritarian on the, I'll put a fence here. If you want to cross the street, I tell you that it's dangerous, but if you cross, I'll put a fence. And then I'll put an extra fence, a taller fence. And they would try to go into measure that I was at some point working as a doctor in emergency room and ambulances on the roads. And I was like, why are you spending so much public money to try to take care of people so bad and so far? Try to almost avoid, like, let's arrest that guy that wants to kill himself, to not let him kill himself. It's like, what is the individual freedom in this type of society? I start philosophizing, thinking a lot about this. It's like, should we go that far? Should the government go that far to avoid people to take risks? And that is actually something I talked a lot about in Corona times and lockdown, because I think it should be, yeah, we are a community working with like WHO saying things, recommendations, and the government passing it to people, and being prepared for the worst if it happens, but not setting up decrees, martial laws, and forcing people, demanding people of wearing masks under the risk of being punished by
Well, sure, but
fining, by jail. There is a way that I think the law works, that it has been not followed. Those principles have not been followed.
sure. And what you're touching on is philosophical tradition, communitarianism. So people say, what's your theory of government, and that allows for risk taking and does have some kind of collective response? Then the answer that some people have thought through is the metaphor is a low but strong safety net. And we have that in America, which is the idea is in America, you're not going to be involuntarily homeless for a very long time. You might not have a nice house, but you're not going to be living in a dumpster. Like, again, I was watching this special on Pablo Escobar yesterday. That's what reminded me of the book, The Accountant Story, was Pablo found out that there was people living in a dump, and the government of Colombia was actually going to destroy the dump that the people were living on. So he went there and he just built them all houses, and they weren't big houses, but I mean, they were houses, right, that they didn't have. And that was, of course, why Escobar became such a hero to the common people, is because that's what the government should be doing. Not these big mansions, not these big grift projects for the Boeing Corporation and the bailing out of Wall Street. Is everybody should have a low but strong safety net. And then that's how people do take risks, because you realize, like, because here's the reality for America that most people, unless you've lived in America, can't appreciate, but even people in America don't appreciate is I've had young men were coming up to me, blah, 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 crybabies, right? And I'm like, why don't you just start a business? And if the business doesn't work, do you have kids? No. Do you have a wife? No. Then you plead bankruptcy. Well, what if I pled bankruptcy, my life would be over? No, it wouldn't be. In the United States of America, we have very, very liberal bankruptcy laws. And within 3 years, your credit's fully restored. So we've taken an entire generation of people, young people, and in America, it works for women now too. If women are like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, go start a business, go all in. If it fails, you're fine. And that's what people, they go, I won't be fine, it'll be a failure. And that's the problem people have with their minds, and this culture of hopelessness and despair that is taught to young people. Now, the culture of victimization is, if I were instructing people, we would have a nation of innovation and risk-taking, and people understanding, okay, so I might be 30 years old starting over. Whoop-de-doo, I'll get a 9 to 5. It might not be the best, but I'll have something. But instead, People are taught you're a victim, blame someone else, fight with them. But then meanwhile, you're not going to raise your station in life. You're just going to have chaos. That's, again, what is happening in America.
In Brazil, it's even worse because the government it's very protectionist in all the sense. So people do not have that much money and don't have a way to get the good source for the fair price. In the I just talked to a photographer 2 days ago, and he was talking about how it's difficult to start a business as a photographer because you have all these imported good cameras that arrive in Brazil for double price because they import everything with 100% taxation. So
Right, and that's
yes,
again,
we have
and that's why
government
too.
sometimes just stopping people from progressing in many levels as well, not just helping. And I'm kind of like very skeptic about those type of policies that will grant people, or guarantee people's their safety economically, because this is a type of economic political system that is going to implode. It doesn't sustain itself, and I don't know. It happens so much everywhere, and I think we are dealing with that not realistic.
Right, and that's why people come to America from these kind of nations, because in America, if you want to be a photographer, you just go buy a camera and you start taking clients. You don't need a business license. You don't need, all of these other regulatory barriers. Whereas when I lived in Paris for a while, you can't just start a business. You can't just say, oh, okay, I'm going to, do X. No, 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 no. There's 1,000 different regulatory things. And then you would see that creep in America where it became a meme. Kids would try to start a lemonade stand. And then because of this creep of victimization and overregulation, police would then come in and say, well, you need a permit to sell lemonade, and health department. And you're thinking these are children, right? But that's left wing. That's how it is in most of the rest of the world, is you can't just start a lemonade stand. You can't just start a business. You can't just order a camera and then go start taking pictures and list it on a website and try to take on. It just doesn't work that way. And that's why all of these other nations are so impoverished, and why America wasn't impoverished, but why we're heading that way, because that's what we're teaching a whole entire generation of people, is that there's all these barriers.
I think it's just interesting that people are very susceptible to more regulations, and I think that is the evil of all, and how we grow more bigger government in all the ways. Like here in Canada, it's much worse than Brazil. In Brazil, you actually can buy a camera and just open a business. Probably photographer. I don't know. They are very organized in unions, and the left, what I hear, close to whatever they think. It's from my sister that she's very into like all this narrative. So she has like all that mindset taken from what people told her. Like Bolsonaro is racist, is homophobic, is misogynist. And when I ask, like, what are the evidence? Oh, I heard someone saying there is not even an analysis of the fact. But I want to go through guerrilla mindset now, just because we were talking so much about mindset and about thoughts and filters, that I think it's very much into the book. What I actually would like to ask you is a little personal question, but it's something that I've seen you talking on your seminars about the book, is if you're still an introverted yourself, because I saw you have you said that you were introverted, but I really enjoyed the idea of talking about like getting out of your comfort zone to improve, and talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So physiologically, I am an introvert. And by physiologically, I mean that there's a way that introverts process dopamine. Dopamine is a motivation chemical. It's a feel-good chemical. And I always like to say that even though we're oppressed because we're the minority, they are, people who are extroverted have extroverted privilege, because the world is created for extroverts. Oh, why are you home by yourself? Oh, why don't you talk? Why are you antisocial? Why are you this? And I remember as a kid, I was treated by my own parents as if there was something wrong with me because they're like, why aren't you down here with the rest of us? Well, because I want to be in my room by myself. Oh, are you suicidal? No, I'm becoming that way because you people won't leave me alone. So there is an extrovert privilege because our introvert mind processes dopamine differently. So for me, if I'm out in a group of people, after an hour, I'm good. That was great. But an extrovert, they process it differently and they get caught in a different feedback loop and they want more and more and more, and they don't want the night to ever end. Now, so it is a physiological characteristic. The flip side, though, is that I had realized that, oh, I was using it kind of as a cop out. Well, if I go do this thing, this event, I'm going to be tired afterwards and everything. And there's a line between, you have a physiological thing. Like I couldn't just go squat 500 pounds right now, right? But that doesn't mean you can't go to the gym and squat more than you could. And that's how you bring out your full value as a person and all of your gifts, is that you do push through your limitations and then you become the best that you can become.
Really nice. Pretty much like it summarize is like it gave like the book in a nutshell.
So since you're Brazilian, do you like, even though he's a far left-wing nutter, do you like Paulo Coelho?
Oh, I have read a bunch of Paulo Coelho. Yeah, because I have been like through the path of not have like indoctrination from my family, religious indoctrination, but I always had like I was an introverted for a good amount, in the way that I would not socially just talk to people about things, but I would be socialized like in between people and just listening more what people were talking about.
So what's your favorite book that he wrote?
Oh, I don't think I have any. Because like I used to like him and the things he talks when I went through this path of accepting myself as an atheist. As a kid, I was just listening to people in Brazil, very religious, talking about God's existence and, the sure of a creator, the certainty that everything is so complex that had to have a creator. And I was more stuck in the questions like, okay, where this super complex God to create everything that's complex came from? Because if the premise is that everything needs to be created, he had to be created as well. And they did not have that answer for me. And I was like, okay, I don't believe there was a more complex being than everything sitting in the middle of nowhere, just got bored and snapped his finger and created everything. So I had this question for a very long time, and I went through different religions. So when I was an spiritist, I read a bunch of like spiritualist books, and he is more in that tendency that talks about try to give explanations for supernatural feelings and things that we have created. They're layers, as I have read so many spiritist books, there are even different hypotheses, I would say, inside their own beliefs. So for me now, it's all woo-woo.
Okay,
supernatural stuff. I don't.
Yeah. Okay. Because I've the first book of his I read, because I'd always heard people say read The Alchemist, and it was like a cliche. So I'm like, I'm not.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Beautiful book. But the first book of his I read was Hippie, which was a newer one that came out where he talks about road trips that he was taking, and he just writes about love and everything. So I read that book first, and then I read The Alchemist, and then I read 11 Minutes. And because I read 11 Minutes actually got him into some trouble because it's a very erotic book, and
you like the fiction more.
I think he's just a beautiful, soulful writer who writes about love. And even with The Alchemist, it's just a parable about the fear of running from who you are, the fear of chasing your dreams because you can't handle the heartache of not reaching your dreams. So if you never chase your dreams, then you can say, oh, I could have chased them and I never did. But the real heartache is, what if you chase your dreams or you chase love, then you can't find it. So I became a late fan of his work, but I like his fictional stuff. I don't.
Yeah, I like actually that is something I definitely use in my life as a a way of living. But it was more like it was just one sentence that my mom would summarize the whole book into telling me, you will regret to not do something more than doing it, because you never would know the result, and you would always question yourself, what would happen if I had done that thing that I wanted so much and I did not even try. And it's pretty much what you said. And I don't know, I think there is a lot of those I used to read a lot of those books with like messages that I think is just stretching into a story, some simple message.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I have not read anything from him recently, and yeah, I kind of distanced myself of like this type of philosophers a bit, or even more nowadays. What I hear a lot of people that is very popular in Brazil, and I know this culturally, I was always very far from the things were popular. I go take a peek, and I usually like think is very related to obscurantism. It's very poetic in a way that is cheap. I don't know, you know. So there is another guy that's very being very popular as a philosopher nowadays in Brazil, and is very all into postmodernism and coexist, very pragmatic in some ways that I think I would believe what I know about Jordan Peterson that I would like to explore, not necessarily in a conversation, but with him, I would probably explore more the things we agree than what the things we disagree. Who's that guy I'm trying to point out? Olavo de Carvalho, I think.
Yep,
He's
yep, yeah. That's Bolsonaro's a big fan of his.
so yes, yeah. I've heard a lot of him, but yeah, for me, it's just like it's painful.
Mm-hmm.
Not kidding, because it's just so full of fallacies of things that I have spent years watching into extensive epistemologic shows that
Yeah.
explore beliefs and evidence and how do you get to that conclusion, so I can actually take the same path and conclude the same thing. So it's very deep.
Yeah, you can pronounce it properly for me, but Olivo de Carvalho.
Yeah, Olavo de Carvalho.
There you go. Yeah, yeah. Because and that's the thing. Reading habits take a different thing. I was very younger, was more into the hard philosophy. What is like the nature of truth? And then I get a little, and then I was very not a sentimental person at all. And then as I'm in my 40s now. I like to read things about love and connection and the meaning of life and the deeper spiritual meaning of the life, and it changes. So I thought, oh,
There's
well, it's good.
there are some books that ah, it's just because I don't read those things for like the last books I read related to anything like that were probably 7 years ago. I became an atheist, like assumed, came out of the closet and everything. Just reading science and more relatable things like that was 5 years ago. So probably the last books that I still carry some with me, or 7 years ago, something like that. I read probably something popular in Brazil too, and that is a priest in Brazil, Padre Fábio de Mello.
Mm-hmm.
And this book actually is really good because it talks more about relationship in general. So it's not like religious in that sense, but it talks about relationships, like couples or mother and son or parenting, and how people sometimes keep other people in relationships like in a negative way, and how to deal with this is a good one that since you said you like to explore this interpersonal relationship and feelings, it's a pretty good one.
Well, I
Just
like to read books whenever I would travel, because I was initially whenever I travel, I always want to read the book that kind of defines a nation. So when I was in Cambodia, I read a book on the Cambodian genocide, survival on the killing fields. When I was in Vietnam, I read a book about the Vietnam War, but from the perspective of the Vietnamese people and what that did to them. And I was initially going to, before coronavirus and everything, the travel restrictions, I was going to go to Brazil and do like a short documentary on fake news in Brazil, and also the scandal with Qatar, bribing the officials and messing up everybody's, soccer, football, as we all call it. And then I was like, oh, who's a Brazilian author that I can read and try to, get in touch with the feeling or the zeitgeist of the culture. But then coronavirus hit, so I won't be in Brazil for a while.
Hope you go to Brazil. You're gonna enjoy a lot.
Well, the good news is that Bolsonaro's son follows me on Twitter, as do the philosopher I mentioned earlier. So yeah, the good news is that when I do make it down to Brazil, I'll be I'll be protected, I guess, so to speak.
Oh, no, yeah, and something that is very different from, I think the reality from what people expectation of Brazil, it's, I don't know, I try to mention to people when talk online, some people I play, I was like, yeah, hey, have you been in Brazil? And some people like, I don't even have like I don't even want to go, afraid of how it is. And I was like, look, it is pretty different from my experience going to Dominican Republic, for example, that I went this last year. That I was actually impressed, and I was like, maybe this is what people think Brazil is like. That is like outside of the resort is ugly and scary. And it is not very
Oh yeah,
urban
I
look.
don't have that perception. I remember when I
Yeah.
was.
So it's not like what Brazil is, but there are areas. It's like
That's the
it's
whole
what I
point.
imagine in Europe. Europe, people talk about no-go zones. Yeah, there are in the big cities, and that's not all the cities. So you go in a small city like mine, countryside. No, there is no favela there, or not dangerous areas. Where you're gonna accidentally enter, like drive in, and then people are gonna kidnap you, kill you, rob you, whatever. Uh, in Sao Paulo, Rio, yeah, and that's what I usually tell people, like, don't try to be adventurous in Brazil. Just don't go there and I'm gonna rent a car and get a GPS, because that is the trap. You can with a GPS fall into a favela, and yeah, you done
No,
probably.
that was the same thing. Yeah, but the same thing when I went to South Africa is that um, parts of it are just astonishingly beautiful. You wouldn't believe it. But if you're in America, you're like, oh my God, in South Africa, everybody's being murdered every day. And it's like, no, no, no. Those are the shanty towns, which I think is a not PC word for them, but that's what they're referred to. And but that's what I mean by safe. It's just they're like cultural norms. And the idea is, yeah, don't go to here, or if you go there, don't go after a certain hour. And then they're taboo topics. So when I was in Thailand, my friend said, you can say whatever you want, but don't insult the king of Thailand. And I was like, well, I would never even think to insult the king of Thailand. But though, those are when you go to places, those are the cultural guys. The same thing too is if you are going to come visit the U.S., like Chicago's not dangerous, but there are a few blocks of Chicago that would absolutely be the end of your life, just without question, if you went there, especially at a certain time. And it's like that. It's like that, of course, all around the world. So if I went, not if, but when I go to Brazil, I'm going to want to get, I'm going to want to go in the places that maybe you have to be careful. And that's where it's good to know the right people who can facilitate that.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and in Rio specifically, as I have been there as a tourist, uh, some favelas that have been pacified in the last government or two governments ago have police standing on the end, like the gateway for the, like, it's just a normal street, but as there is no gate or anything that signalizes the start of favela and some more dangerous community, there is usually a car with two policemen already stopping and say, like, are you sure you're gonna go there? It's the favela. Because as a tourist, I was walking by those places once, and they were there just to advise. They were like, yeah, no, we don't want to go. Like, are
Right.
you sure? Like, you have someone there? You going there? And it's yeah, there are the minimal cautious rules as you would have in any foreign different place whenever you go. Um, for sure, in Brazil, I'm excited to hear that you're gonna talk to Bolsonaro and make a video, a movie about it, and I would love to see what's gonna come out of it, because I personally have uh, left Brazil because of the religious prejudice that exists in Brazil as an atheist. because when I came out of the closet 5 years ago as an atheist, was drastically worse than what I expected.
Hmm.
And with the message, uh, uh, like with the justification that it is democracy. It's democracy. 86% is Christian, and you have to believe something or you're going to be bashed. And I was like, no, that is definitely not the meaning of democracy. It's like we still we're still in a republic that protects the minorities. And
Well, even in the U.S.,
unhappily,
you can't run as an atheist. We've never had an atheist president in the U.S.
yeah, you
Yeah.
would
So
have no chance.
no, no. So yeah, even in the U.S., yeah, you couldn't run as an open atheist, and there used to be a very, it's not true anymore in the US, very, very strong cultural stigma, even 20 years ago when I was in college, to be atheist. It was everyone sort of collectively agreed that you should be Christian or at least believe in God. That's changed considerably over the past 20 years.
Yeah, that is pretty good. And I see that actually happen in Brazil as well, because even the number that they try to hold, it is a falsely inflated number. You know, I'm into that six, no, 86% because my parents baptized me in the church, and it's not that easy to do an apostasy in Brazil. You have to send a letter with documents, go to church and stuff. And I was like, I'm fine with that. But it is something that is important politically, because that is how they move laws around beliefs and not respecting, for example, in the case of Bolsonaro, the secularism of the state and the government that is actually in its own constitution. So it is a lot of good conversations, mainly when talking about politics, secularism in Brazil. And I think it is complicated because Bolsonaro himself ran the election on to Brazil over above everybody and God above everything, something like that.
Yeah, Brazil first, and yeah, very strong Christian point of view and very strong Christian culture, and we see that too, and that's where, in a way, people on quote unquote my side in the U.S. are very dismissive of privilege, but religion, adherence to religious beliefs is a form of privilege in that if you're like, oh, I'm Catholic and I go to mass, you're just kind of accepted. But if you don't, then you're othered pretty quickly. What do you mean? What's wrong? Then it becomes like a really big problem. So it's assumed that if you're Catholic, everything is just like a-okay. The buildings will be closed on Sunday, or things will be organized sort of around your religious beliefs without you even realizing it. Whereas if you're not, and then you go against that, you can face some problems for sure. So that's where I think people, privilege is such a loaded term now, but there is a sense of privilege, and if you belong to certain kind of groups, life does just go a little bit smoother for you.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the important points are the prejudice that these people suffer and that keep them, for example, that kept me in the closet for 20 years trying to fit in some type of religion, because you have to believe something, how that can be negative to people's lives personally, individually, and the same way as the politics should not benefit a specific group. Because in the case of Bolsonaro, what he did, for example, is like, I'm going to give this ministry to a very evangelic person. So we're not talking about people with same rights, because he's already saying that he's benefiting one group, and that is very anti-constitutional. So it's like, it is a problem that we need to be able to separate and understand that the atheist person talking about secularism is not talking about burning books or banning religions, but is talking about keep your religion on your private sector, in your private life, and the public sector will be free from religions. Because one thing I like to make the jokes for presidents that keep defending Bolsonaro being so pledging for the Catholics and the religious vote is, when we Brazilians have more Hindus in Brazil, and then we get someone in power that will ban barbecue that they love, maybe they will understand. Yeah. So yeah, thank you very much for this much time. I'm not gonna hold you anymore, but it's just so much involved into mainly in the gorilla mindset. People sometimes are stuck. I would suggest everybody to go watch your seminars. Not gonna explore that much, but it is a lot to talk on how we have this gorilla mindset that we can reset, that we can actually reset, and how to do it. Thank you very much for coming, and I'm sorry for holding you for too long.
No, no, my pleasure. Thank you again.
People, please follow, and how they can follow you on Twitter. Where are your main platforms, and where they can
Yeah, just
follow and see everything?
Cernovich.com is the best. Cernovich.com. And then it's at Cernovich at Twitter.
Thank you very much. People, thank you for watching, and see you next video.
See ya.